Hello, I'm Matthew Galluzzo. I'm a federal criminal defense attorney here in New York City. I've been a defense attorney for about 15 years, and prior to that, I was a prosecutor in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I worked for a period in the sex crimes unit there, so I have quite a bit of experience prosecuting and defending cases involving allegations of sexual abuse and rape. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about the Sean Combs case in federal court here in the Southern District of New York, also known as Puff Daddy or P. Diddy or Diddy. And he was arrested this week, you may have heard, based upon a federal indictment that was filed here in Manhattan, charging him with RICO and a number of counts relating to the sex trafficking and coercion of women. Those are very serious allegations. They carry with them a minimum sentence of 15 years and a possible sentence much larger than that. And Sean Combs is currently incarcerated at MDC Brooklyn. That is the primary federal prison here in New York City for those people who are awaiting trial. It's a prison that I visit quite regularly to see clients, and certainly not a very pleasant place. In fact, there's been a lot of press lately about how terrible the conditions are there. MDC Brooklyn has been the subject of quite a bit of federal oversight, criticism from judges, criticism from the press and the public. It's chronically understaffed. Narcotics are rampant, so is violence among the inmates there at MDC Brooklyn. It's a terrible place, and it's just really a shame that anyone has to be incarcerated there pending trial. But it's somewhat surprising that Sean Combs is incarcerated there pending trial. You would think that someone like him with no criminal record and a huge amount of money to post for bail would be incarcerated pending trial. But let's explain what happened. He was arrested this week based upon this indictment, and he was brought before a magistrate judge, which is not uncommon. In federal court, we have district court judges and we have magistrate judges, and magistrate judges play more of a supporting role to the district court judges, who are ultimately the ones that decide sentences and that preside over trials. But magistrate judges do sometimes make decisions about bail, for example, and in this case, for Mr. Combs' arraignment, he went in front of a magistrate judge, and the prosecutors asked that he be detained. Now that means not released on any sort of bail whatsoever. And because they knew he was going to be getting arrested when he was, they had already prepared what's called a detention memo. And that detention memo is available online. You can find it for yourself, but it's the prosecution's detention memo for Sean Combs, if you use those search terms. And this was filed in advance, and it explained why they thought that Mr. Combs should not be released on any sort of bail. They cited four things in particular. One, they cited the strength of their case. They argued that there was a voluminous amount of evidence, that they had multiple witnesses, and that this had been an investigation that went back to 2008 in some form or another, that there were videotapes of Mr. Combs engaging in violent acts against women, that they had recovered firearms from his home, they had recovered narcotics from his home, and that there were recordings of him apparently attempting to intimidate witnesses. So the first and foremost was that there was a lot of evidence, according to the prosecutor. Second, they said that he was a danger to the public, specifically because he had been physically abusing women for the 16-year period alleged in the indictment. Obviously, he was hurting people by behaving in that way, but also because he possessed firearms, also because he was intimidating witnesses potentially. This is dangerous conduct from the public's perspective, and that's one of the things a judge has to look at in determining bail. Prosecution also argued that there was a risk of flight with Mr. Combs, that although he has family here in the United States and his big media empire here in the United States, that because he's a billionaire and he has his own private jet, that he had the means, if he wanted to escape the United States and evade prosecution, perhaps move to Brazil and buy a mansion down there or something like that. But that certainly a man with his means might have the ability to hide. But then really the most interesting one here was they argued that Mr. Combs, if he were free on bail, would continue to obstruct justice. And by that, they mean that he would be manipulating or intimidating, coercing potential witnesses in the case. And in support of that argument, the prosecutor stated that he had already done it. In fact, it's contained in the indictment here, if you want to look about it, some of these allegations, especially following the filing of some 2023 lawsuits by some of the purported victims in this case. Supposedly Combs and his associates started calling witnesses and giving them a false narrative and trying to coerce or intimidate them into sticking to a story that was not true. And there's a pattern alleged in the indictment of essentially Mr. Combs intimidating or physically abusing people in order for them to not discuss some of the illegal activities that he had forced them to engage in. So that was an interesting argument. You don't see that very often, but apparently the magistrate judge found it compelling because he did choose to detain Mr. Combs. Now, the defense, in turn, had their own proposal, and that's what you have to do in federal court. You don't just go in and say, can I have a bail? You actually have to propose something that your client is capable of doing for bail and suggest that to the court. And the defense did come prepared with a huge proposal, which was, in short, they proposed a $50 million bail, which is one of the biggest ones I've ever heard. It was going to be collateralized by a $48 million home in Miami, which apparently had no mortgage on it, and also Puff Daddy's mother's $2 million house. They were also going to surrender his passport, which is pretty typical in federal court. He was going to agree to a territorial restriction, basically his home in Miami or his lawyer's office in New York. And those sorts of things, they submitted would have a guarantee that he was going to come back to court. And certainly it's a huge amount of bail. But apparently it wasn't enough. Now, I'm not sure it was really the amount of money. I mean, if Sean Combs had said $900 million, it may not have been enough. It may be just because there was this issue with the potential obstruction of justice and the other two factors, the danger to the public and the risk of flight. It might have been insurmountable. It may not have been a question of how much money was on the table. But in any case, this decision from the magistrate judge was appealed to the district court judge, Judge Carter, the very next day. And both sides, again, put some arguments in writing. And unfortunately for Mr. Combs, once again, Judge Carter refused to grant Mr. Combs a bail. Now, the defense is certainly welcome to continue to attempt to propose bail to Judge Carter. I think it gets increasingly difficult to persuade a judge after the first decision is made, but it's not impossible. But I think circumstances are probably going to have to change for Mr. Combs to have a chance to get bail. There's either going to have to be some sort of revelation of the evidence about the strength of the people's case, or about whether or not he actually intimidated some of these witnesses. I think that's really probably what's going to take to move the needle with Judge Carter. I don't think that coming back with, say, $500 million as a bail proposal is really going to change his mind. I don't think that was the issue. I think he's going to probably have to get at some of these prosecutors' arguments about why he couldn't be at liberty. So maybe they can be creative and suggest that he'll be monitored by a security company and won't let him have access to a phone. I don't know. I don't know what else they can do, but it's going to take something other than just money and the bail proposal, I think, in order for Mr. Combs to get. The other possibility, of course, is if Mr. Combs is the victim of any violence at MDC. That's been a popular argument with defense attorneys in this city that MDC, Brooklyn, is such a terrible place that if you have any kind of health condition, you just can't be safe there. You just can't guarantee the health and security of a person in that building. And, it's getting some traction in some cases here in the city. So I think that maybe, I'm not hoping that this happens to Mr. Combs, but should Mr. Combs encounter some sort of health issue or some sort of threats of violence while he's at MDC, I think he would have perhaps a reasonable basis to go back to the judge and say that, I need to be at home under a doctor's supervision because at MDC there's insufficient health care, or people are threatening me, or I've got injured or sick in some way while I'm there. I think that's probably maybe the other way that this might work for him. But in any case, this case may take, 2 years to get to trial. It's hard to say, but there's supposedly an awful lot of discovery to review. I think the case is big and complicated and probably involves a lot of witnesses. So I don't anticipate that we're going to see a trial in 2025. I think it's probably going to take a little longer than that. So Mr. Combs will presumably be detained throughout that time. And certainly it will be an interesting trial if and when it happens. I suppose there's a possibility that there will be a guilty plea. That happens in most federal criminal cases, but given Mr. Combs' age and the seriousness of these allegations and the potential jail time he's facing, even on a plea, I have a feeling he's going to take a shot at trying to prove his innocence at trial, and I expect that's what's going to happen in about 2026. Or I should say the trial is going to happen in 2026. The outcome, too soon to tell. But you can check out my other blog posts as I talk a little bit more about the allegations. Stay tuned. As developments come down in this case, we'll talk more about it. Thank you.